Hey everyone, welcome back to BookSquirrel, and this is my review for Stephen King's Salem's Lot. Da-da-da, BookSquirrel. I don't know. Salem's Lot is technically the second published book by Stephen King, and it is the seventh book that I'm reviewing from my horror TBR list. I'm getting through it. I figured that this book deserves a review at night when it's dark and spooky. So here we are. As you can also see, I got my copy of it for future reading. It's going to be watching over my shoulder this entire time. Just taunting me as it will. As I usually do with my book reviews, once I've finished a book, I will go over my ACORN system, which looks at my approach of the book's characters, offerings, readability, and narration. After I go over those 5 topics, I will then give it a final score out of 100 acorns based off of my subjective experience overall with the book. Reminder that this is a reflection of how I received this book, and if you have a different opinion of the book, I welcome you to leave a comment as such. First, a little bit of details about the book. Salem's Lot runs about 512 pages. It was originally published in 1975, but according to the copyright page of my copy, mine was published in 2024. This is the first Vintage Books Premium Mass Market Edition. All right, and here is the blurb. Ben Mears has returned to Jerusalem's Lot in hopes that exploring the history of the Marston house, an old mansion long the subject of rumor and speculation, will help him cast out his personal devils and provide inspiration for his new book. But when 2 young boys venture into the woods and only one returns alive, Mears begins to realize that something sinister is at work. In fact, his hometown is under siege from the forces of darkness. And only he, with a small group of allies, can hope to contain the evil that is growing within the borders of this small New England town. I'm waiting for the air. Can you hear it? The house is speaking to me. And now there's a garage. The house is alive! Let's get to the acorns. Approach. I actually had a very interesting experience with the approach of this book. I found the blurb to be mediumly intriguing. My brain really focused in on the words old mansion, and with the cover being, this image looking out a window, I think it's so perfect that the curtains create this like coffin shape in the window. You're obviously looking out. I mean, there's a tree and the moon, and so you're obviously looking out from a house, right? So I went into this thinking, oh, it's just a spooky haunted house book. I haven't read one of those from Stephen King. I think this will be very exciting. I haven't read The Shining. I really need to read The Shining, but nothing about the blurb really excited me to a huge degree apart from that. And honestly, I kind of think that this cover is a little funny. I mean, look at the people. Like, it's not going to focus, is it? I don't know. I just kind of think that there's something kind of cartoony about the cover, and it's just my brain. However, having said that, because it had Stephen King's name attached to it, I've heard the name of this book many times before. I've seen it ranked highly in multiple people's best horror book lists. And so I had a lot of hype around going into this book. And despite my medium intrigue with the blurb and the cover, I was really excited to get into this book anyways. What really makes this interesting to me is that when I started reading, I realized that I had read some of this book before. My brain was like, I'll know it if they go get ice cream, if there's a dog at a graveyard, and if there's a guy shooting rats at a junkyard. And then as I'm reading, they go get ice cream, there's a dog at a graveyard, and there's a guy shooting rats at a junkyard. And I was like, how did I not realize that this was this book? However, I have to say, I hadn't finished the book before. My memory really only stopped around like the 100-page mark. But I remember that I used to have a friend who was obsessed with Stephen King, and he had all of the hardcovers. And what he would do is if he ever lent them out to friends, he would take the dust jacket off and keep that as a reminder. He'd even put like a post-it in it saying who he lent it to, and that would be his reminder that someone else had his book. I borrowed Needful Things from him. I borrowed The Eyes of the Dragon from him. And this definitely must have been one of the ones I borrowed from him as well. But I must not have finished it. And honestly, after I got through chapter 3 is a huge character dump. I'm so bad with names. I'm pretty sure I just got overwhelmed and probably just stopped reading it. Not like a bad DNF or anything, just probably like, oh, I'm not in a mindset to read this or to remember all these names and all these people. But it did kind of concern me because I was like, why don't I remember more of this? Was it just boring? No, I clearly stopped. So that's why my approach to this book was really interesting, because it jogged some memories. And as I mentioned, my mind kind of gravitated towards the words old mansion. I thought the whole thing was taking place in a spooky house. And since this is really more about the town as a whole, that's why I didn't piece it together. But I did really like the first 10%. I found it to be engaging, and I was still very excited to read this book and finish this book and see what it was all about. Characters. Characters are a huge strength in this book. Major. I am a big fan of characters. I'm a fan of character development. I'm a fan of having a variety of different personalities and just really having a lot of layers and depth to characters and character conflict. I find it to be one of the main reasons I read, which is why I see an ACORN as characters. And pretty early on, the blurb mentions Ben Mears. And as you start reading the book, there is kind of this vague prologue. But once you get into the chapters of the book, you find that, yeah, you do follow Ben Mears. But you pretty quickly into the book find out that this really isn't just Ben's story. This is the story of every single person in that town. Now, you're not introduced to every single person, but you're introduced to a wide variety of people throughout like all walks of life in the town, from those who run the main establishments on the main streets to the family members that are just trying to make ends meet, maybe even work out of town, to the kids that go to the schools there, the teachers that teach them, the people that run the facilities, people in faith, people who help run law enforcement or government. You really get to meet a wide scope of the people in this town. And not only do you get to meet them, you really get to be in their minds. As I mentioned, that chapter 3 is really just a big character dump. It's very overwhelming. You get to meet about 30 different characters in that one chapter alone. And it can be very overwhelming. Thankfully, I do keep a character list, and it served me very well in this book. I would recommend that anyone who reads this book keep a character list. Unless you're really good at remembering characters, I definitely have a deficit when it comes to names. It is a weakness of mine. It is a horrible weakness of mine. If you're able to create a character list and really follow these characters, this book has payoffs up the wazoo. Stephen King really is an expert craftsman, I feel, when it comes to establishing unique characters. He gives them these like little quirks and doesn't really have to go into that deep of a dive for you to really get flavor out of who these people are. For instance, I like to think of the deputies in the town. There's 2 deputies. When you look at these 2 deputies side by side, one is the junior, and deputy constables are not given badges. So when you're first introduced to him, he's putting a badge on that he got from a detective magazine, because that really goes to show how much he values this role that he has. He even complains in his mind a little bit about how he wished he could be the full-time deputy and not have to share duties with the senior deputy in town. And the senior deputy, he smokes cigarettes just like almost every single person in this town. Either you're smoking cigarettes, are between smoking cigarettes, or are kids dreaming about smoking cigarettes. It's kind of insane. There's so much cigarette smoking in this book. But he smokes Pall Malls, and he will store his Pall Malls in a sucrettes container. And I just found that detail alone just to be really fascinating. It just really shows like this is a practical person. He's not about being fancy. He doesn't care about having a specific cigarettes case when a sucrettes container will do just fine. Like, Stephen King just gives you these little bites that just add so much depth. It's surprising and really sets them apart. And he really gives you a lot of the psychology of these characters too. from people who are really interested in mythology to people who are of the faith or people who are just very pessimistic, very outwardly aggressive and hateful, or people who are a little bit more reserved and kind of, gossip. There's just so many psychologies that he shows you, so many different personalities and behaviors that I felt like this town was alive. It felt like you knew those people. It's so rich and has so much depth. I was just really impressed. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Parable of the Sower in the idea that he's establishing a community, but Parable of the Sower is told in first person, and so you really get a sense of community from the main character's perspective the whole time. This is third person, and it's third person omniscient, so you are constantly jumping from character to character and really seeing the town and the other people through different lenses, and the characters really are the story. It's spectacular. And I really felt like almost every character had development too. I don't think I've ever seen a story with this much character development. It seemed like every single person was impacted by the events of the story. It's fascinating. You really get to see like the fruits of all of these introduced characters ripen. And there are some character scenes where you're like, was that necessary? Kind of seems maybe a little superfluous, but it's like, no. The point is you're seeing how the entire town is affected. And because of that, you kind of need the wide net that Stephen King casts. It's really fascinating. I think characters is an excellent part of this book. Offerings. I really think that the primary offering is kind of what I just stated in my characters section. Ultimately, what you're getting from this book, you're getting a very satisfying and in-depth story of how a force of evil can take a town from its everyday life and really turn it on its head. And I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail with regards to what this force is, because frankly, a big part of the story is kind of going, well, what's happening in this town? And in the end, I just found it to be so satisfying and a very good version of what this story is. I would say a secondary offering of this book is if you are familiar with Stephen King's other works, primarily things like Needful Things or It, The Shining, perhaps, there's almost like different glimpses of like different seeds of thought starting in this book that then become those other books. Not saying that this is like the origin of Pennywise or the origin of the Needful Things shop, but there are elements of those stories in here. And there were multiple moments where I was like, oh my gosh, I wonder if this part wasn't what then he elaborated to become these other stories. It feels like before the fact Easter eggs. Salem's Lot was Stephen King's second published book, and so this was before it. This was before Needful Things. And it's really fascinating to read this book knowing of some of his works that he would then make in the future and really kind of seeing these links and these common themes and ideas. So that was another offering that I found to be really cool in this book. And then I would say a third offering in this book is really a time capsule, a look at what it would be like in a small New England town in the 1970s. Stephen King uses a lot of popular references of the time, and so it really breathes that life. You get to see what everyday life would be like for someone in a small town in 1970s. You get little hints at what the economy was like and just overall pop culture of the time. So I thought that was really cool. Readability. It's a 500-page book, so it's a medium-length book, but the chapters are broken down into bite-sized chunks, and it really lends to this feeling of constant progression. It really feels like every time you get to the end of just a chunk of a chapter that you're making progress, and I really, really appreciated that a lot. The beginning of the book can be a little bit drawn out with how many characters and how much exposition there is, but ultimately, I found that once you get over that hump, I read the second half of this book super fast. It can be a very quick read, even though some of it does have a bit of a density to it. Since Stephen King does use a lot of pop culture references, again, this was published in 1975. The pop culture references are not what they are today. There's a lot that can be lost in translation. And if you are someone like me who wants to just really know everything that is being talked about or what he means when he's referencing this person or that thing, whatever. It can really slow down the reading, and it can kind of give you a distance from what's happening. But at the same time, it's an opportunity to learn. And I find it adds a lot of flavor to that time capsule feel that I mentioned in offerings. And on top of that, he also has a very large vocabulary, and he uses it regularly. I had to look up quite a few words in this book pretty regularly. But the thing is, what I found is that these words tended to be very accurate, and they were really good at communicating like a very specific image or idea that otherwise I don't know if I would have gotten with just a super accessible word. When it comes to the triggers of this book, though, I would say that there are a few. There's some child abuse. There's also some hints at sexual assault. But overall, those are fairly few. The one trigger that seems to be the most prevalent in this book, in my opinion, is that of homophobia. I was really kind of disappointed with how much homophobia is in this book. And let's be real, homophobia doesn't mean a fear of gay people. Okay, phobia really means an aversion or a non-fitting. That means hate towards gay people, a strong dislike of gay people, a very strong assumption of negative stereotypes of gay people. It's not a fear. And there's a lot of it in this book. And there were a few instances of the F slur, which disappointed me. I will say two things on this, though. One, it does seem to be fixed by the story around the halfway point. It kind of turned around, and that really did kind of fall away, which I really appreciated. And then two, I did a little bit of research. It got to the point where I was like, okay, is Stephen King representing homophobia here? And what I found was that there was some speculation when it came to Stephen King being homophobic. I don't know if that was based off of this work or other works, but he had been addressed by that. He did say, I'm not homophobic because I don't have a fear of gay people. Again, that's not what it means. However, on that note, the thing that I need to add, and that I'm very happy to report, is that about 9 years after this book came out, in the mid-1980s, Stephen King started to really be an open advocate for LGBTQ plus rights. And that just made me so happy. Because let's be real, if you are not gay and you are going to use the struggle of gay people as an entertaining aspect of your book, I don't care how realistic it is. This is not a historical fiction. This is just fiction. And it's up to you whether or not you're going to purport certain harmful ideas. The least you can do is, in your public facing appearances, be outspoken in favor of equal rights. And he does that. And so it more than made up. Because let's be real, there are a lot of people out there who will use other people's struggles that they will never experience or even understand as a means to create conflict in their stories, and then also not really counter those things in their public facing life. And that would have been a problem for me if that was the case here. This was written in the 1970s, so I give him a slight pass given all of the extra work he's put in to help give queer people a voice using his platform. That's awesome. I'm getting off my soapbox now. I do regularly talk about what I see as potential triggers, and I feel like it would be a failure of me to not talk about this aspect of this book in my review. Narration. As I mentioned before, Salem's Lot is told in third person omniscient, and I feel like Stephen King really uses that to his benefit. Obviously, this is a story about the people in a town, and he tells the many perspectives of different people in that town, and he does it expertly. He does it very, very well. I never was confused about whose perspective I was in. Usually they're separated by the different chunks of the chapters. There was only a couple times when he kind of bounced around, but even then he was very clear about doing it. And so I thought that he did a really good intentional job with using this tense. As far as the structure of the story, it does start out with an intentionally vague prologue. And I am someone who doesn't like the literary device of being intentionally vague. Like, I hate it when people are like, and then he stopped in his tracks because he saw something. Okay, tell me what it was. His blood boiled and his heart stopped. And it's like, just tell me what it was. Thankfully, there are only a couple of instances of this kind of vague storytelling in this book, and Stephen King is just so good at not withholding the information very long, or just using it as almost like a cliffhanger of sorts. Even the really vague prologue, I could tell that he was intentionally not telling us things. It's very obvious. But by the end of the book, I was like, it's genius. It's genius. And I'll tell you, I would recommend that anybody who reads this book for the first time, read the prologue, obviously, but then at the end, go back and reread it. He would have given away too much information about the book if he hadn't been vague. And so I can respect that. And the prologue didn't bug me so much. It was really just those other instances when they're like, and then the character stopped in their tracks, and then they saw something so incredibly terrifying. It's like, just tell me what it is. Especially if I'm in their perspective, and if they saw something, I should be seeing it too. But again, Stephen King is very good at not keeping that going. He's very good at saying, and then he saw something and it was this. It's like, okay, thank you. I find that he has a way of using literary devices that I don't really like normally, but in a way that convinces me. He even used a lot of waxing philosophically, speaking in general terms. And normally I'm someone who doesn't like that. But with this book, it was like, yes, preach at me. He's just so good at writing. There were even these moments where it's like, no, I don't connect with this, but I get where you're coming from. I'm just sold by his writing. It's insane. The bulk of the story is incredibly well paced. There was never a single moment where I felt like something was going on for too long. And one thing that he does so geniusly with the third person omniscient is that he will actually keep the progress of the story moving by going, oh, yeah, there's not really a whole lot of interesting thing happening with this character for a little while. So now we're going to jump to this character that is having something else interesting going on in the meanwhile. And then this character and then that character. It keeps it fresh. It keeps it moving along. And then eventually he skips to another big event. I felt like he's just so good at keeping engagement alive, keeping the intrigue of what's going on alive. So expertly paced. I feel like I could learn so much from this book alone as far as my own writing goes. Speaking of timing, oh my gosh, one of my favorite literary devices that he uses is he gives thoughts a temporal quality. And what I mean by that is that when people kind of get lost in thought, time keeps moving. And so people will get lost in thought and then they'll look at their watch or something and it'll be like, holy buckets, I just lost track of time because I was stuck in my thinking. Or they'll even miss what other people are saying. I loved this so much. It really made it feel like their thoughts were kind of playing as everything else was still going on. It added to the immersion. I loved it so much. I love that. And he's also an expert in his narration at avoiding info dumps. He'll weave exposition into dialogue in ways that make it still very interesting. There's a couple of gossips in the town, and so you get a lot of exposition through gossips, through just social webs. He also uses a lot of anecdotes, which I find to be really fascinating. There will be a character that will come up to something. It will trigger a memory of something that happened in their past, and that'll inform you not only on the decision that the character might make, but about why they might maybe have anxiety about what's happening around them, or why it might slow them down. And instead of it just being an info dump, he shows it to you in such a wonderful way. And then when it comes to the end, I feel like it was so satisfying and worthwhile. And you just feel like, oh yes, a little bit more of that. I can't gush more. There's just so much literary goodness stuffed into these 500 pages. Just every single page is just chock full of just story goodness. I have never been so okay with reading 500 pages in my life. It was so satisfying. And yes, I was incredibly spooked by this book. This book was more effective at spooking me than any other book I've read on my horror TBR so far. I have not been sleeping the best the past few nights. But yeah, this is a very effective book. Okay, so now it's time for me to give you the ACORNs. And I tell you, I know I complained a little bit about the triggers. I know I complained a little bit about not really having the most exciting approach. But you know what? I don't care. This has become one of my all-time favorite books. I will never feel bad recommending this book to anybody. And honestly, I wasn't entirely sure that I was going to feel that way when I first started this book, especially having the recognition that I had started this book in the past and had failed to finish it. Again, I think that was just because I was overwhelmed by the characters. But having said that, I don't even feel like I want to deduct points about the gay thing, because it does make you hate certain characters that you're supposed to hate. And again, Stephen King has done a lot for the gay community by using his platform to speak out for them. I don't want to deduct points at all. I don't. In the end, I don't want to deduct points. So Salem's Lot is getting my first 100 out of 100 on this channel, and I stand by it. Thing is that I know a lot of his books do not deliver in the same way, although now I am such a stan. I was already a fan of his Pet Sematary, and I just hope that given that it is 1,000+ pages, I need him to bring Salem's Lot level of goodness to that book, because I had to give it 100 out of 100. Like I mentioned earlier, I feel like I could learn so much out of his expert use of even literary devices that I normally hate. He convinced me of some things that I normally just I would not like to read. And yet he does it so expertly, and it tells me, okay, well, that means that there are good ways to do some of these literary devices that I just absolutely do not like. Why is this so good? Why? I'm happy it is. So having said all that, I guess it is time for me to pick my next book. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read In West Mills next by Deshaun Charles Winslow. I have a digital copy of this book, so I can't hold it up all nice and like, but it's only 272 pages. I think that's what I want to do. So yeah, I'm excited. If you did like this video, please consider liking. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Please consider subscribing. And otherwise, I'll see you in my next video when I review In West Mills. Until then, I hope you're having a wonderful whatever, and BookSquirrel out. Da-da-down, ba-ba-bum, BookSquirrel. I don't know.